right, and welcome to another edition of Civically Speaking, Seattle City Club's podcast. I'm Alicia Crank, Executive Director, and today I am joined by Alexis Mercedes Rinck. I said your last name correctly. Did I say it right? I should have checked with you sooner. But she's candidate for Seattle City Council's position 8. Good morning. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So there's 4 of you that are running for this spot, so the primary should be interesting. So first, just tell people more about who you are, the person that is running for office.
Well, thank you again for having me. So I'm Alexis Mercedes Rinck. I'm a renter. I'm a transit rider by choice. I used to be a waitress, and now I'm running for Seattle City Council to fight for a city that works for all of us and not just a select few. I've spent my public policy career working on housing, human services, and the health of our communities. But I started as a community organizer, really rallying around bringing communities together around working for clean energy, working for police accountability, and fighting for racial justice and bodily autonomy. And between those 2 bodies of work, from being an organizer to working in policy in this region countywide, I want to bring that expertise to council. And a lot of that spirit, even of what I started in my public policy career, is actually rooted in my upbringing, being raised by my grandparents, because both of my birth parents were what we might call gang-involved youth when I was born. They were teenagers. And I am here today and didn't have to go to the foster care system because of my grandparents. I got the chance to grow up in a resourced community in a very proud union household. And I truly believe that I stand here today as a living testament to when we invest in young people, regardless of their beginnings, we can change generations. And my birth dad is alive today. My birth dad's alive today because of a transitional housing program. We have to protect our investments that support working families and for folks that are seeking recovery. And so I'm coming to this stage to run for city council to fight for those investments.
Now, you come with a lot of stuff. There is a whole lot to unpack already just in that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just seeing you talk about how you grew up and some of the issues that came with that. And then, working at former waitress, and you're a renter, but you're also someone that has also done work in policy. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So how does that make you stand out from others that are running? And how do you believe that experience is something that's needed on this current council?
Absolutely. I feel really honored by the policy work I've been able to do. In one role, I held a position focused on health and human services and public health as well. Actually, during the bulk of the pandemic was what I was doing this work on. And that organization worked across 38 cities in King County. And so you're working with Issaquah, with Shoreline, with Renton, with Tukwila. I was doing the work of delivering and helping municipalities understand and interpret information coming from the federal government and entities in the midst of the pandemic. And in that role, it was my job to bring together folks from those cities in caucus meetings and help develop positions. Like, how do we align 8 different people, each representing a different city in King County, around a housing policy or position? That's the kind of work that I've done in this. And paired with that, I've done work on the individual city level. I've worked for a Parks and Recreation department. And so I've gotten that experience of what it means to just work within a city doing that work. And then having spent some of my more recent years working explicitly on homelessness, I was the lead on developing a countywide 5-year plan to address homelessness, and worked across 39 cities, over 100 different service providers to craft that plan. Over the course of a year, we had over 1,000 people engage with that plan in all different kinds of ways. I think we held 40 different workshops, including folks who were in programs, folks who are frontline staff actually implementing the programs, and then working with cities, working with our system partners. We engaged everybody on this plan because fundamentally, we need an all-in approach when we're talking about addressing homelessness. I've crafted interlocal agreements between jurisdictions. Most notably, I worked with the 5 North King County cities and got each of those city councils to vote unanimously to step forward in a regional approach with the organization I was with. I'm very proud of that. I think that's a testament to what we can do when we have patient and determined partnership and work alongside to really develop and understand how we can do our work together. And then I'd close by saying my day job is now at the University of Washington. And in that role, I'm in a budget office, and we also do the legislative analysis. So our team leads in state legislative session. And we will essentially, this past session, I read every bill that went through the state Senate. It was over 500 bills. And in terms, oh my gosh, goodness for computers. And assessed for impacts to the university. And now we're in budget season. And so I've had this exciting opportunity to work across communities and also really understand how institutions operate, what's feasible. And I understand that balance between what do we want to do politically and then what does it mean to implement something. And that's a unique experience I think I could offer to the council during this time.
We're definitely going to hit on the budget item in just a second, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about what's currently going on as far as housing and homelessness is concerned, with the role that's trying to be filled right now and not necessarily being successful at it.
Yeah.
What's your take on what's happening with trying to fill that opening? And I'll say, I just out of full disclosure, when I was reading about it yesterday, my initial thought was extending the time isn't going to help if you're not addressing the underlying issue or issues that are creating this. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
It's hot off the presses, right? I was surprised, but maybe not so surprised given my experience with the agency. And I think it's important to note that currently KCRHA is falling short of its primary objective, which is to centralize the response to homelessness in King County, which is intended to foster a more efficient and responsive system for people experiencing homelessness, as well as for our service providers and the wider community. And this failure stems from critical operating issues, and as well as the fact that we haven't had adequate enough attention from executive leadership. And this is ultimately really obstructing our progress on that primary goal. Nonetheless, the overarching aim of adopting a regional approach to tackle local homelessness is the right one. And so, as speaking for myself as the former director of subregional planning and equitable engagement for KCRHA, I wholeheartedly dedicated myself to this cause because I firmly believe that a coordinated regional system holds the potential to really significantly improve our experiences of unhoused and housed individuals that are seeking support services. And over 2 years of advocacy and effort, I made the difficult decision to depart. And when it really became evident that the agency, as structured, lacked the capacity to fulfill the initiatives that I spearheaded alongside regional partners. And so I remain determined to deliver a better system for our unhoused and housed neighbors, now just from a different position. And with that, I would align and say the issues that have come to light have been ones that I've recognized early on in my role and were part of the reason that I left. And I believe as someone who worked at the entity, I actually would be able to speak to and shed more light on what some of those operational challenges may be and how we can fix them.
Let's talk money. Let's talk about the budget, right? And so one of the reasons I wanted to talk, especially broach this with you, is because when you look at some of the news coverage right now, and even looking at the current makeup of council, some people are thinking you're and other candidates are being identified as the leftists and trying to, and ideology, but also at the same time, there are people going, that might be great for you personally, but what does that have to do with running our actual city, knowing what's happening right now, especially financially? So on your site, you talk about, doing the hard work to balance the budget and represent community priorities. Mm-hmm. So what are some examples of what you mean by that? Because I think a lot of people get lost in the soundbite of we need to balance, we need to prioritize, but without practical example for the lay person to go, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Right. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a key piece, especially in this moment, and maybe I'm saying this as somebody who's out there talking to community in the midst of campaigning, many communities are unaware of the budget crisis that's happening, are caught off guard when I talk about the budget crisis and talk about what I would be prioritizing in this budget crisis that we maintain funding for, but people are caught off guard. And I think in this moment, it's important for us to reckon with that fact and start talking to communities about what these cuts can mean for their programs. Because as it stands, if we do not act to bring online some form of progressive revenue there will be cuts. And I've heard some I should say, during a forum that took place last week, I heard Councilmember Wu explicitly state that everything's on the table in this process. To that end, it's if we are to take that approach, we need to start talking to community very, very soon, talking about what are our priorities and what do communities want to see funding maintained for. And so, having done that work, being a former government administrator, now higher ed administrator, done that work of representing community priorities in a planning process, doing that deep engagement piece. And when I say deep engagement, I'm truly going to where folks are naturally congregating, community meetings, cultural celebrations, and talking to folks about what they value about their communities. What do they want to see maintained? And so I'm committing to bringing that approach as somebody who's worked in equitable engagement specifically to how do we also represent those priorities when we're talking about budget negotiations. Ideally, we are in a place where we're able to bring online more revenue, so we are not looking at as many cuts, and still being mindful that if we get to a place where there are cuts happening, that we are making sure that things that communities, especially those that have been historically deprived of wealth, namely Black, Indigenous, or disabled community as well, are able to have their priorities represented in this process. And I've held firm on maintaining that we need to maintain our investments in affordable housing, our investments in our Green New Deal initiatives, equitable development, and making sure that our monies are going towards making our communities safer are effective in actually doing just that. And so, and lastly, I'd close with this piece around for folks that are working at the city as it stands. This budget crisis has been happening for a few years now. This is an ongoing issue, and I just have to voice that the amount of swirl and maybe peril is a dramatic word to use here, but from the perspective of folks who are city employees, that's having this ongoing budget crisis makes for a stressful environment as well. And I think that for the stability of our city workers and all of the bodies of work associated, we can do our work better and create also just a better working environment for everybody when we have some stability in our budget. So we have to find a way through. I hold firm that we need progressive revenue so we don't have cuts. But to that end, I think it's really important that we remain committed to being transparent with community and engaging with community so they know what's coming ahead of them and know how to weigh in.
Well, so we have the different priorities. Can you talk a bit more about worker protections? Because I'm seeing that phrase pop up a lot recently. And I think it can mean different things to different people. And I think for some, and I'll just include myself in this number, is I think about that. I think about the recent DoorDash delivery issues. And where does that stem for you from a simple concept of that being one of your priorities?
Absolutely. I think it's a great example you just brought up. I think for many of us, we're seeing the headlines about this effort to roll back minimum wage for delivery drivers and this whole piece around these fees that corporations are imposing. And I think it has a lot of us thinking about what are the measures that the city has in place to protect workers. And so seeing this as maybe a initial sign that maybe this council might have different priorities as it stands, I think there's a strong call from our labor community and from other folks that are already just working class people who are struggling because wages aren't keeping up with inflation. With inflation, everything's just more expensive. It is becoming harder and harder to live, work, and play in the city. And so as we're talking about worker protections, we're talking about how do we maintain our livability in the city so working people can remain here and live good lives here, raise families here. And paired with that, this is tied to the budget as well. When we hear folks talk about how everything's on the table in these budget negotiations, that includes things like our Office of Fair Labor Standards, which is one of our two local enforcement mechanisms to make sure that employers are abiding by proper employment practice and employment law. And that is an office that will undergo investigations and seek justice for workers that may have their rights infringed upon. So when we're looking at this moment where we're evaluating what's continued to be funded, I stand firmly and say we need to continue to fund our Office of Fair Labor Standards. It's one of our few mechanisms to make sure that our laws that support workers are being followed.
So there was another quote that I saw on your website I wanted to talk about, which was, it's time for the next generation of Seattle leaders to step up. And I want you to wax a bit more poetic about that by what you mean. Right now, at least for City Club, we just launched our Civically Engaged Youth Council. So we're trying to make sure that Gen Z, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing that phrase, but Gen Z to have more of a predominant voice in what's happening civically across the spectrum, whether it's politically or just in your neighborhoods. Tell us what you meant by this phrase.
So much of what is ahead of us seems concerning. And I say that as somebody, I guess I'm younger. Maybe I'm a little on the younger side. I like to think so. But when we look at our future ahead and we look at the moment that we're in the midst of a housing crisis. We see plenty of folks outdoors experiencing homelessness every day. We see in this region our summers getting hotter. We see what is happening across the world, and me, my colleagues, my friends, people in my age group wonder, what does the future have in store for us? What does this all mean? And feeling as though it is our moment as younger folks who want to live to see a retirement age and be not sweating profusely as it is too hot to enjoy outdoors. When I say it's time for the next generation of Seattle leaders to step up and shape our future, I want to see young people feel and be engaged in our systems and calling for and fighting for the types of policy changes, planning changes that would actually create a future that we want to live in, because we are going to be alive for a long time after this. And we're in this moment where we can really set the trajectory of what kind of city we want to live in. And so I would close by saying I've met a number of folks in my age range that have been working in government service, have been working in community organizing, nonprofit, and are so brilliant and lead with integrity, and yet haven't stepped into always that leadership role. They're looking up at the elders above them and kind of waiting for a torch to pass, or so to speak. And I think there is something there. But I also I want this to be a call to say, no, it is our time. If we want to shape our future, the moment is now. And so it's a rallying call for all the brilliant young people out there that want to really shape our future to step into that.
So let you have the last word, which to this question is, how would you advise others in Seattle, no matter what generation they are, to be more civically engaged across various areas?
I think there's your standard piece of get involved in an organization you've heard about and you care about. I've been a lifelong volunteer in a number of areas. I think listening to local media is important. There's a lot of local media sources that are talking about some of our city and county's pressing issues. But I would also say, and maybe this is a bit non-traditional, but something that is more fun, is have a house party, have a dinner party, invite people over again, and focus it on a topic that's happening locally, and invite experts that may be working on the issue. I know I have been invited to a house party like this. Come just to talk about our homelessness system. I guarantee experts that work day in and day out would love to just talk to some folks in a casual setting about our systems and make it fun. Share a meal. And that's not to say, and create an environment where questions are. I've been to a couple of things like this now that are not tied to any organization, but just somebody who wanted to pull together a bunch of folks in their late 20s, early 30s, and talk about an issue. The comprehensive plan was what was pulled together on this. And we spent 2 hours, all of us just sharing what we knew, sharing people that we knew were engaged with it, sharing perspectives that we've heard, talking about, do we submit a letter? Do we go and give comment? Those types of forums, I feel like, are low barrier ways that we can just make civic engagement a lot more accessible, a lot more fun, and a lot more real. It will connect us with our communities again. And I'm always a fan of sharing a meal with people to really start movement building.
It's funny, I'm listening to you talk about this, and I'm like, that actually sounds like our civic cocktail events, to be honest. Because we have dinner, people hang out, sit around, we talk about these things. So I hope to see you at a future civic cocktail where we do all those things. So thank you so much for taking time out to have this conversation with me. I've learned a lot. There is so much more I want to ask you about, but I'll just have people go to your website and learn more information about you and your priorities. And I am looking forward to City Club actually convening a city council debate this fall. So I hope you will be there in one capacity or another, because civic engagement, like you said, is important. And you know what? Our debates are kind of fun. So people should come to that. Again, thank you everyone for listening and or watching. And we'll have another Civically Speaking coming up soon. Take care, everybody.